The year was 1966. The Sands Hotel stood like a monument to excess in the Nevada desert, its neon sign cutting through darkness like a beacon. Inside those hallowed halls, fortunes were won and lost, and every corridor whispered stories of money, power, and secrets that would never surface. The dining room was an architectural marvel. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls of light, casting warm amber across mahogany tables imported from Europe. Rich burgundy velvet lined the walls. Soft jazz played continuously from hidden speakers. The carpet was so thick that footsteps made no sound, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere where the only sounds were silverware against china and expensive laughter. It was Thursday evening, just after 8 o'clock, when everything changed. The slap echoed through that dining room like a gunshot. It was the kind of sound that violated the space so completely that time itself seemed to freeze. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every fork froze mid-air. The small jazz combo faltered for just a fraction before recovering. Every head turned toward the source. And there, 3 tables away, sat Dean Martin with a glass of scotch. He wasn't actually drinking. He'd learned long ago that appearing to drink was more valuable than actually drinking. The waiter couldn't have been more than 20 to stumbled backward. His tray went flying. Plates shattered. Wine splashed like blood. The boy fell, catching himself against a table, his hands splayed out desperately. One hand came down on broken china, and blood began seeping from a cut across his palm. Standing over him, straightening his cufflinks with casual indifference, was Tommy the Hammer Morello. Tommy wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'9", but he was built like a fire hydrant, compact, dense, immovable. His suit was expensive Italian silk. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His watch was a Rolex. Everything about him screamed money and violence. His nickname wasn't metaphorical. There had been 7 documented incidents where Tommy had hospitalized someone. The actual number was probably much higher. Rumors spoke of bodies buried in the desert, of men who simply disappeared after crossing Tommy Morello. Whether true or myth, in Las Vegas in 1966, perception was reality, and the perception was that Tommy the Hammer was someone you absolutely did not antagonize. He was a made man in the Chicago outfit, an enforcer whose job was to ensure people understood the consequences of stepping out of line. He'd built a reputation quickly, the kind that made grown men cross the street when they saw him coming. Tommy leaned down toward the terrified waiter, saying something quiet enough that only people at his table could hear. But Dean Martin could read lips. He'd picked up the skill over years in noisy nightclubs. Pick it up and bring me another steak. And this time, don't you dare bring me something burned. You worthless. The insult hung there, communicated through body language, through contempt, through the way he looked at this boy Michael Rossini like he was beneath notice, less than human. Michael scrambled to pick up broken plates, his hands shaking so badly it was painful to watch. He was crying, trying not to, his jaw clenched. His hands were trembling, and another piece of china cut deeper. Blood mingled with spilled wine. But here was the crucial thing. Not a single person in that dining room moved to help. Not one. They didn't offer assistance, they didn't speak up, they didn't do anything. Because in Las Vegas in 1966, you didn't help someone Tommy Morello had decided to humiliate. You looked away, you minded your business, you survived. Those were the rules, except for one man. Dean Martin wasn't like everyone else. He'd already earned a reputation as the one entertainer who refused to bow to anyone. A year earlier, he'd faced down Vincent Antonelli on stage. The story had become legend in the underworld. But this was different. This wasn't someone challenging Dean directly. This was someone exercising power over someone completely defenseless. And Dean couldn't walk away from that. He sat at his table for 30 seconds more, watching Michael hurry toward the kitchen. Then he set down his napkin slowly and carefully. His friends immediately sensed something was about to happen. "Dean, don't," one whispered urgently, reaching for his arm. "That's Tommy Morello. You know who he is." "Yeah," Dean said, standing up and straightening his jacket. "I know who he is." He began walking across the dining room with casual grace, not hurried, not aggressive, just present. Every eye followed him. Tommy was back in his seat, laughing with his crew. Dean stopped at the edge of Tommy's table. "Tommy, how's the steak?" Dean asked, his voice smooth as velvet. Tommy looked up, surprised. Then his face split into a grin. Dean Martin, the king of cool himself. Steaks, terrible. Burned to hell. That's why I had to educate the help. The word hung between them. Educate. Dean nodded slowly, glancing down at the table, at the steak. It looked well done, perfectly cooked. He glanced back toward the kitchen, visualizing Michael's blood-streaked hand, the tears on his face. Educate. Dean repeated, his voice calm but with something different now, a subtle shift suggesting this wasn't simply conversation anymore. That what we're calling it now? The table went quiet. The three men with Tommy leaned back slightly. Tommy's smile didn't fade, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You got a problem with how I handle my service, Dean? I got a problem with a grown man slapping a kid who's just trying to do his job, Dean said. His tone was casual, almost friendly, but everyone in the room felt the shift. This wasn't conversation. This was a line being drawn. Tommy's crew shifted in their seats. One started to stand, but Tommy raised a hand and he sat back down. Sit down, Frankie. Let me talk to Mr. Martin here. Tommy looked back at Dean. You know what your problem is, Dean? You think because you sing pretty songs and make people laugh, you can stick your nose in places that don't belong. Your entertainment. Assets to be controlled. If you get out of line, assets can be disposed of. Dean listened without interrupting. When Tommy finished, Dean did something that made several people inhale sharply. He pulled out a chair from an adjacent table and sat down at Tommy's table without being invited. The audacity was breathtaking. It wasn't aggressive, but it was an assertion of equality, of disrespect for the hierarchy Tommy was establishing. Maybe you're right, Dean said, settling into the chair. Maybe I don't have any right to stick my nose in your business, but then again, maybe I do, because I believe how you treat people matters. It matters whether anybody's watching or not. What matters is basic respect. He paused. Or maybe I just don't like watching guys get pushed around when they can't push back. Maybe I was raised differently. Tommy leaned forward, his elbows on the table. That kid spilled soup on my jacket last week. He brought me cold coffee yesterday. He burned my steak tonight. 3 strikes, Dean. That's fair. Dean glanced at the waiter station where Michael had disappeared. The boy's hands were still shaking. Blood mixed with wine stains on his shirt. Dean turned back to Tommy. You know what I think happened? I think you ordered your steak, well done, like you always do. And I think this kid brought you exactly what you ordered, cooked perfectly, but you were having a bad day. Maybe someone disrespected you somewhere else, and you needed to feel big again, so you took it out on the easiest target in the room. The temperature dropped. The musicians faltered, then recovered. Conversations at nearby tables stopped entirely. Nobody spoke to Tommy Morello like that. One of Tommy's guys spoke up. Mr. Martin, I think you should go back to your table now. Dean didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on Tommy. What do you think, Tommy? Am I right? Or do you really believe that kid burned your steak on purpose just to ruin your evening? Tommy stared at Dean for a long moment. His jaw was clenched so tight, you could see muscles working beneath his skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and dangerous. You're making a mistake, Dean. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Dean said, and I've learned from most of them. But I've also made some decisions I'm proud of. I've stood up for people when it mattered. Those are the moments I actually remember. Those are the moments that mean something. Standing up for a kid who can't defend himself, that's not a mistake. What Dean didn't know was that Tommy had been nursing a grudge against the Sands for months. The casino had started cutting back on complimentary services for mob associates. Free rooms were becoming harder to get. Credit lines were being questioned. The slap wasn't about the steak. It was about power. It was about reminding everyone who really ran this town. And now, Dean Martin was challenging that power in front of a room full of witnesses. Tommy leaned back and smiled like a shark. Okay, Dean, you want to play the hero? Fine, here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to me right now in front of everyone here. You're going to say you were out of line, and then you're going to walk away, and we'll forget this ever happened. Dean tilted his head slightly. And if I don't, he asked. Then you and I are going to have a serious problem, Tommy said slowly. And I don't think you want that kind of problem, Dean, not with me. The dining room was so quiet you could hear ice melting in glasses. Every person there knew they were witnessing something dangerous. This wasn't entertainment. This was real. Dean Martin could walk away right now. He could apologize, save face, go back to his life. Tommy would save face too. Everyone would survive. But then Dean looked at Michael again. The boy was standing at the periphery of the dining room, trembling, eyes wide, his entire body shaking. In that moment, Dean saw something in that kid's eyes that reminded him of himself. It reminded him of young Dino Crocetti from Steubenville, Ohio, getting pushed around by guys who thought they owned the world. Dean had escaped from that life. He'd become famous, successful, untouchable. But Michael was still vulnerable, still at the mercy of men like Tommy Morello. In that moment, Dean made a decision. He stood up from the chair. For just a moment, everyone thought he was going to walk away. His body language suggested surrender. But instead, Dean did something nobody expected. He walked over to the waiter and gently took the tray from Michael's trembling hands. The boy looked at him with wide, confused eyes. Dean held the tray carefully and turned to face the entire dining room. His voice was calm and conversational, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Everybody see this kid's hand?" Dean said, holding it up so the blood was visible. "He's bleeding because he was cleaning up broken plates. Plates that got broken because a customer decided he didn't like his steak. A customer who decided that instead of being patient, instead of being kind, he would resort to violence." He paused. "Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but where I come from, we don't hit people who are just trying to earn an honest living. We don't hit people because we're having a bad day. That's not how civilized people behave." Tommy Morello slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Dean, you're crossing a line. You crossed it first," Dean said, turning to look directly at Tommy. "I'm just responding to your actions. I'm just saying out loud what everyone in this room is thinking. I'm standing up to you." Then Dean walked back to Tommy's table. He picked up the plate with the supposedly burned steak and examined it carefully, holding it up to the light. "This steak is cooked exactly the way Tommy ordered it. Well done, no pink. Charred on the outside, just like he likes it. I know because I've eaten dinner here enough times to know how the kitchen works. There's nothing wrong with this steak, except that Tommy decided there was something wrong with it." He set the plate back down. Tommy stood up now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You calling me a liar, Dean?" His voice was low and dangerous. "I'm calling you a bully," Dean said simply. "And I'm telling you that if you've got a problem, you take it up with someone who can fight back. You don't slap kids who are just trying to feed their families." The men at Tommy's table all stood up now. 3 large men, all known enforcers, all with reputations for violence. The implication was unmistakable. This was about to get physical. But Dean didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, relaxed, patient, like he was waiting for the band to start playing. "Dean," Tommy said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "I'm going to give you one more chance. Walk away right now, or what happens next is on you." Dean smiled that famous sleepy smile. "You know what, Tommy? You're right, this is on me." He turned to Michael. "Michael, go to the kitchen, get yourself cleaned up. Take the rest of the night off. Tell the manager Dean Martin said you get full pay for tonight, you understand me?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "But, Mr. Martin, I can't go on, kid. You're done here. For tonight, anyway." Michael hesitated for just a second, then practically ran toward the kitchen. The moment he was gone, Tommy's face twisted into something ugly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Martin." "Maybe," Dean said. "But at least I can look at myself in the mirror tomorrow morning. Can you say the same?" That was when Tommy swung. It was a wild, angry punch, the kind thrown by a man used to people backing down before it ever connects. But Dean had grown up in Steubenville, where differences were settled in alleys behind pool halls. He'd been in fights before he became famous. He saw the punch coming from a mile away. Dean stepped to the side with a small, efficient movement. Tommy's fist went sailing past his head, missing by perhaps 6 inches. The momentum carried Tommy forward, and he stumbled, catching himself on a nearby table. Glasses shattered, wine spilled, a woman screamed. Tommy's 3 guys moved in immediately. But before they could reach Dean, something unexpected happened. The other men in the dining room stood up from their tables, not to fight, but to form a human barrier between Dean and Tommy's crew. A gray-haired man in an expensive suit spoke up. "Tommy, that's enough. We all saw what happened. The kid didn't do nothing wrong. You started this. Another voice chimed in from across the room. Dean's right. You can't just go around hitting people because you're having a bad day. That's barbaric. More voices joined in. The entire dining room was mobilizing. These were customers, high-value customers, people the Sands couldn't afford to upset, and they were siding with the entertainer over the mobster. For the first time in his life, Tommy the Hammer Morello was outnumbered, not by guns or muscle, but by public opinion, by decency, by people who'd finally seen enough. Tommy pointed a shaking finger at Dean. This isn't over, Martin, you hear me? This isn't over. It is for tonight, Dean said calmly. And, Tommy, next time you eat here, maybe try being nice to the staff. You might actually enjoy your meal. Tommy and his crew stormed out of the dining room, knocking over a chair on their way out. The moment they were gone, the entire room exhaled. It was like someone had released a pressure valve. People started talking again, nervously at first, then with growing excitement. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. Dean Martin had faced down one of the most dangerous men in Las Vegas, and he'd won, not with violence, but with courage, and the simple act of standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself. Dean walked back to his table and sat down. His hands were steady as he picked up his scotch. One of his friends leaned in and whispered urgently, Dean, you know he's going to come after you for this, right? Maybe, Dean said. But that kid gets to go home tonight with his dignity. That's worth whatever comes next. The next morning, Dean woke up expecting trouble, a threatening phone call, a message from Tommy's guys, maybe worse. But the call wasn't from Tommy, it was from Jack Entratter, the president of the Sands Hotel. Dean, we need to talk. My office now. Dean arrived 20 minutes later, still in his sunglasses, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed, which he had. Entratter was behind his desk smoking a cigar. He didn't look happy. Sit down, Dean. Dean sat. What the hell were you thinking? Entratter exploded, his voice rising. Tommy Morello, you had to pick a fight with Tommy Morello. Do you have any idea what kind of position you put me in? What kind of position you put this hotel in? The kid didn't deserve what Tommy did to him, Dean said calmly. I don't care what the kid deserved, Entratter shouted. Dean, I've got the Chicago outfit breathing down my neck. I've got Tommy demanding that I fire you, ban you from the property. Maybe worse. Do you understand how serious this is? Dean leaned back in his chair. So fire me. Entratter stopped mid-rant. What? Fire me, Dean repeated. If that's what you need to do to keep the peace with Tommy, then do it. I'm not apologizing for what I did, Jack. That kid was just trying to do his job. Entratter stared at Dean for a long moment. Then he started to laugh. It was a tired, exasperated laugh. You're either the bravest son of a bitch I've ever met or the stupidest. I honestly can't tell which. Probably both, Dean said with a slight smile. Entratter sat back down and took a long drag on his cigar. I'm not firing you, Dean. You know why? Because after you left last night, something interesting happened. Every single person in that dining room came to the front desk. Businessmen, high rollers, even some of the other connected guys. They all said the same thing. Tommy was out of line, and you did the right thing. Dean raised his eyebrows. And then this morning, I started getting calls, Entratter continued. Customers wanting to come see your show, specifically because of what you did. We sold out the next 3 nights in 2 hours. Dean didn't say anything. He just processed that information. Here's the thing, Dean, Entratter said. The mob might own the casinos, but you know what keeps the lights on? Customers. And customers don't like seeing waiters get slapped. They don't like bullies. You gave them something they didn't know they wanted. A hero? I'm not a hero, Jack, Dean said. I just did what was right. That's exactly what makes you a hero, Entratter said. Look, Tommy's still pissed, but he's also smart enough to know that he lost last night. He lost in front of a room full of people. If he comes after you now, he looks even worse. You embarrassed him, but you also gave him an out. He can walk away and save face. Dean stood up to leave, but Entratter called after him. Dean, that kid, Michael Rossini. He came in this morning asking if he still had a job. He was terrified. Does he? I don't know. Jack, do you? Entratter smiled. Not only does he have a job, but I promoted him. He's working the VIP section now. Better tips, better hours. I figured after what he went through, he deserved it. Dean smiled, a genuine smile. Thanks, Jack. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You made me remember something I'd forgotten. We're in the hospitality business, and that means treating people with respect, all people, even the ones serving the steaks. Dean walked out of Intrater's office feeling lighter than he had in years. 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening, something happened that nobody could have predicted. Dean was in his dressing room getting ready for his show when there was a knock at the door. His assistant opened it, and standing in the hallway was Frankie, one of Tommy's guys from that night. "It's okay," Dean said calmly. "Let him in." Frankie stepped into the dressing room and closed the door. He was a big man, easily 250, with hands like sledgehammers. He stood there for a moment, just looking at Dean. "Tommy sent me?" Dean asked. "Yeah, he sent me," Frankie said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to Dean. "Tommy wanted you to have this." Dean opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. The handwriting was surprisingly neat, almost elegant. Dean read silently, "Dean, you made me look like a fool the other night. Part of me wants to make you pay for that, but the bigger part of me knows you were right. I was having a bad day and I took it out on that kid. That wasn't right. I'm not apologizing. Men like me don't apologize. But I am acknowledging that you did what you thought was right, and there's honor in that. You stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself. That takes guts. We're even. You and me, I won't bother you. You don't bother me. But know this. What you did that night, it got around. People in my world, they're talking about it. Some think you're crazy, but some, the ones who matter, they respect you for it. You're all right, Martin?" TM Dean folded the note and looked up at Frankie. "He wrote this himself. Every word, Frankie confirmed. "And Dean, between you and me, what you did for that kid, that was stand-up. My old man was a waiter in Brooklyn, worked his whole life getting treated like dirt by guys like Tommy. Seeing you stand up for Michael like that, it meant something." Dean extended his hand and Frankie shook it firmly. "Tell Tommy we're good." "Will do." Frankie turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. Tommy wanted me to tell you. He went back to the Sands last night, had dinner. Michael was his waiter." Dean felt his chest tighten, and Frankie smiled. "Tommy ordered the steak. Well done." When Michael brought it out, Tommy looked at it, cut into it, took a bite. Then he looked at the kid and said, "Perfect. Best steak I've had in weeks." Left him a $100 tip. After Frankie left, Dean just stood there for a moment, holding the note. "What just happened?" his assistant asked. "Something good," Dean said. "Something really good." That night's performance was electric. Dean walked onto the stage to a standing ovation before he'd even sung a note. Word had spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. The entertainer who'd stood up to Tommy the Hammer Morello, the singer who defended a waiter, the man who'd put his career, maybe even his life, on the line for a kid he didn't even know. Dean did what he always did. He smiled, loosened his bow tie, and stepped to the microphone. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hear there's been some talk about a little incident in the dining room the other night." The audience laughed nervously. "Let me tell you something," Dean continued, his voice taking on a more thoughtful tone. "I've been in this business a long time. I've sung for presidents and gangsters, millionaires and working stiffs, and you know what? What matters is how you treat people when nobody's looking. How you treat the people who can't do anything for you. How you treat the people who depend on your kindness and respect." He paused. "That kid, Michael, he's working his ass off every night to take care of his sick mother. He's doing everything right. And somebody decided that wasn't enough? That he deserved to be humiliated? Well, I don't care who you are or what kind of power you think you have. That's not okay. That's never going to be okay." The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. "Now, I'm happy to report that Michael still has his job. In fact, he got promoted. And the gentleman who had the disagreement with him, we worked it out like men with respect. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us really want. A little respect, a little dignity, the chance to do our jobs and go home to the people we love." Dean picked up his glass and raised it. "So, here's to Michael Rossini and to every waiter, every dealer, every maid, every person working their tail off in this town to make our lives a little easier. You're the real stars of Las Vegas." The audience erupted, and somewhere in the back of the room, standing by the bar, Michael Rossini was crying. The real impact of what Dean had done wouldn't be fully understood for weeks and months. Something had shifted in Las Vegas that night. The mob still ran the town. The money still flowed through their hands. But a message had been sent. Entertainers weren't just puppets. They weren't just assets to be controlled. They had voices. They had power. They could stand up and say no when something wasn't right. Other performers started to notice. When a casino manager tried to force Sammy Davis Jr. to use the back entrance because of his race, Sammy refused and cited Dean's example. When a club owner tried to stiff a band on their payment, Frank Sinatra stepped in. The owner paid up immediately. Remembering what happened to the last guy who'd crossed a member of the Rat Pack, the story spread beyond Las Vegas. It was written up in Variety, and The Hollywood Reporter. Everyone in the industry knew. Dean Martin had drawn a line in the sand, and the mob had respected it. Years later, in 1979, a journalist asked Dean about that night. "People make too much of it," he said, sipping his coffee. "A guy was being a jerk to a kid. I told him to knock it off, that's all, but weren't you afraid?" The journalist pressed. Tommy Morello had a reputation for violence. Dean thought about that for a moment, then shrugged. "You know what I was more afraid of? Seeing that kid's face, seeing him humiliated like that and doing nothing about it. I was more afraid of being the kind of man who looks away when someone needs help." "Do you think you changed anything that night?" Dean smiled. "I think I helped one kid keep his job and his dignity. If that changed something bigger, then that's great. But honestly, I did it for Michael. Everything else was just a bonus." But Michael Rossini remembered it differently. Decades later, after Dean had passed away on Christmas Day 1995, Michael, by then manager of a successful restaurant in Los Angeles, was asked about that night for a documentary. "Mr. Martin saved my life," Michael said, his eyes getting misty. "Not literally, but I was about to quit. I was going to give up on Vegas, go back to New Jersey, and work in my uncle's dry cleaning business. I thought that's all I was worth. That's what guys like Tommy Morello made me believe." Michael paused, collecting himself. "You want to know the crazy part? 2 weeks after that night, I was working the VIP section like Mr. Entreter promised. And guess who came in for dinner? Dean Martin. He sat in my section, ordered the osso buco, and when I brought it out, he looked up at me and said, 'How's your mother, Michael?'" He remembered. Out of everything happening in his life, all the shows and the fame and everything else, he remembered to ask about my mother. Michael's voice broke slightly. "When I brought him the check, he'd already paid it at the front desk, and he left me a tip. $500 in 1966, that was 3 months' rent. There was a note with it that said, 'For your mother's medicine, DM.'" The journalist was quiet for a moment. "That must have meant a lot. It meant everything," Michael said. "But you know what meant even more? The fact that he treated me like a human being, like I mattered. In a town where people like me were invisible, Dean Martin saw me, and he made sure everyone else saw me too." The incident at the Sands became one of those stories that gets told and retold, embellished and mythologized. Some versions say Dean knocked out Tommy with one punch. Others claim the entire dining room erupted into a brawl. None of those versions are true. The truth is simpler and somehow more powerful. Dean Martin saw someone being hurt and he stepped in. He didn't do it for publicity, he didn't do it to boost his image, he did it because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he proved something that Las Vegas and maybe the whole world needed to be reminded of. True power isn't about how much fear you can inspire, it's not about how many people will back down when you walk into a room. True power is about standing up when it's easier to sit down, speaking up when it's safer to stay quiet, protecting the powerless when you could just protect yourself. Dean Martin was famous for being cool, for his effortless charm, his quick wit, his perfectly tailored tuxedos. But that night in the Sands Hotel dining room, he was something more important than cool. He was courageous. And that courage, the willingness to put everything on the line for someone who couldn't fight back, is what transformed a celebrity into a legend. Not in the Hollywood sense, but in the way that really matters. In the whispered conversations of waiters and busboys, dealers and maids, all the invisible people who keep the glamorous machine running, they knew, they remembered, and they told their children who told their children about the night Dean Martin stood up for one of their own. Tommy the Hammer Morello died in 1982. His obituary listed his business interests and mentioned his complicated relationship with Nevada law enforcement. It didn't mention the night he slapped a waiter or the night a singer made him back down. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. His obituaries celebrated his music, his movies, his place in American culture. They mentioned the Rat Pack and his partnership with Jerry Lewis. But Michael Rossini, who attended the funeral in Los Angeles carrying flowers from his restaurant, knew the truth. The headline achievements were impressive. But the real measure of Dean Martin wasn't in the gold records or the sold-out shows. It was in the moments when nobody was watching, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. When doing the right thing meant standing alone, that's the night a gangster slapped a waiter. And Dean Martin's response became legend. Not in the newspapers or the history books, but in the hearts of everyone who ever needed someone to stand up for them. And sometimes that's the only kind of legend that really matters.